I'm wondering, do you disagree with the criticism of the Fed chair's performance or just the suggestion that he should be fired over it?
Look, I have made clear for a long time that I disagree with Jerome Powell on monetary policy and on regulatory oversight. And I've been open and vocal and quite public about all of that. But I have no hesitation about saying that the Fed chair is independent. I will try to persuade him about what I think he should be focusing on interest rates or on oversight of the giant banks. But that's all I can do or anyone else. Try to persuade. Donald Trump's efforts to try to fire him, first of all, would be illegal, but more importantly, will tank the markets. We got a taste of that back in March when Trump said that that's what he wanted to do. And the rest of the world effectively said through the bond market, whoa, I'm not so sure we can count on the stability and independence of the U.S. financial system. So Trump backed up on that, but he continues to say maybe he'll fire him, maybe he won't. And understand, there's a real cost to that. Donald Trump is burning U.S. credibility in our financial system all around the world.
So, Senator, to build off of that, though, do you share the president's hope that the next Fed chair will be more inclined to lower rates?
Look, what I want is a Fed chair who's going to be independent. And given that every nominee that we've seen that Donald Trump has run through here in the Senate for confirmation has started out with effectively a loyalty oath to Donald Trump. And when we ask them about the things they're going to do as the Secretary of Education or the Secretary of Defense, they all just say, I'll do whatever Donald Trump tells me to do. Well, that may work for cabinet officials, but the Fed is different. The Fed is independent. Part of how we get the strength of the Fed is that it doesn't move with the political winds. So sure, I'd like to see someone who is going to reduce interest rates. I'd like to see someone who's going to be tougher on big banks. But Donald Trump is burning his own credibility and the credibility of whomever he nominates to be chairman of the Federal Reserve every time he stands up and indicates that he thinks he has the right to fire them because they're not doing what he wants.
Well, so, Senator, on the question of credibility, if we were to see the nomination of someone like Kevin Hassett or Scott Bessent, who are already serving in the Trump administration, would that meet the independence criteria you're talking about in your mind?
No. Look, people in the cabinet, people who are serving in the administration, serve at the pleasure of the president. That is the structure. That is fine. Donald Trump wants to get mad at one of them and fire him. Have at it, baby. But it's different for the Fed chair, and that is why that office needs to be held by someone who is independent, someone who looks at the economic data and says, look, my job as chair of the Fed is to do what I believe is best in the interests of the economy of the United States, not what is in the political interests of the president of the United States. And I get it. There may be calls around the margins about, is that the right here? Is that what's happening? But that's got to be the structure you start with. And Donald Trump is just trying to set that on fire. He thinks everybody has to start out by bending the knee to Donald Trump. And that is wrong, and it is costly in our financial system.
Senator, I'd like to switch gears here as we have this conversation over in the other chamber. There is a vote still open in the House to try to pass a procedural hurdle to move forward with a trio of pieces of crypto legislation, all part of Crypto Week, one being the Genius Act, the stablecoin bill, of course, the Clarity Act, which is a market structure bill, and some anti-CBDC legislation. While the House struggles to find a way forward, you would like to see none of these bills passed, correct? If the Clarity Act comes to the U.S. Senate, you would not be in support.
Look, I want to see us do strong crypto regulation. But what I don't want to do is see the United States government just sign off on very weak regulation that has been written by the industry. The problem with the stablecoin bill and the Clarity bill in particular is that They don't do anything about the Donald Trump corruption that is occurring right out in plain view. They also don't put enough safeguards in place for consumer protection to make sure that terrorists and human traffickers and drug traffickers can't use the system, and guardrails to make sure that crypto isn't used to blow up our entire economy. So I'm very worried about that, but I want to add one more twist, and that is the Clarity bill has all those problems, but it also has a provision in it that would let any company listed on the New York Stock Exchange opt out of SEC regulation by just digitizing themselves, put themselves on the blockchain, and all of a sudden it turns out that Amazon or Meta or General Motors is no longer governed by the SEC. You do realize that literally would blow up the value of the New York Stock Exchange. That whole stock exchange has been a goose that has laid a lot of golden eggs for people in New York City, for people around the country and around the world. And this would basically just take a baseball bat to it by saying any company that doesn't want to have its books audited and make sure that it's following certain consumer protections and so on can just go somewhere else and be traded on the blockchain. There is nobody in Congress who should support that.
All right, Senator, in just the final minute that we have left with you, I want to pivot to some other news of the day, which is the rescissions package. Republicans are saying that Democrats could shut down the government over this. Is this something that the party would be willing to do instead of striking an appropriations deal with Republicans?
Look, we're just trying to ask the question of what does an appropriations deal mean? When the parties sit down, Democrats and Republicans, they work out a budget, and then after that's done, Republicans come back and say, hey, remember the price we agreed to? We just want to take your parts back. And look, where are they trying to do it? U.S. aid. There are even Republicans who are saying this makes no sense at all. We're cutting off food aid, we're cutting off aid in countries that have an epidemic of AIDS. We're cutting off the help that lets little babies be born now to mamas that are dealing with AIDS, but the baby can be born AIDS-free because of the assistance we give. And that is pennies on the dollar for the return that it gives to global health and will ultimately help keep us safer here in the United States. And the Republicans want to cut that out after we've all allocated the money and agreed to it. That's just wrong. Come on, guys.